Okay, I think it's clear. So after a long time, we're going to start off from where we left. So last we were going through derivatives. There was an end part of it which we needed to address. So we will address that today. After that, we will move on to the Forex market. All right. So let me share my screen. Okay. So in our last class, we were going through derivatives. It's a part of structured finance product, but it's a bigger product segment. So what was a derivative? Derivative is a instrument which is structured for a particular need. Initially, it was structured to address the risk appetite of the investors. So there is an underlying instrument. Based on the underlying instrument, the derivative will be structured. So it's a contract between two people based on that underlying asset where your transaction will occur at a future date at a specified price. What were the three motives behind derivatives? Initially, derivatives were introduced for hedging as a way to reduce your risk exposure, as a way to mitigate your risk. But over time, when investors started using derivatives for hedging, they realized it not only helped them to address their risk exposure, at a certain situation, it even allowed them to get an abnormal return. Now you have to be careful. This doesn't occur every time. There are chances. Now, when I say risk, what do you mean risk? Probability of a loss. There is a probability of a loss happening. If the risk doesn't materialize, then of course you end up with a gain. So there are situations where derivative helps to mitigate the risk, and in addition to that, it provides a return as well. Due to this, a lot of investors started using derivative as a speculatory instrument. They started using derivative to earn a better return than the others in the market. For example, if you know that in the future the Sri Lankan rupee is going to appreciate, okay, if you know that in the future Sri Lankan rupee is going to appreciate against the dollar, you could shop around with the forex dealers, with the banks, and try to get a forward rate. Let's say you end up getting a forward rate of 203. Right now, they're not supposed to give forward rates out. It's an assumed scenario. Let's assume they give you a forward rate of 203 in 3 months' time for you to do your conversion. After 3 months, the market rate is, let's say, 180. Because you were aware of the market happening, now you are able to convert your $1 and get 203 from the bank, whereas your competitor would give $1 in the market and get only 180 rupees in return. So you can see it helped to address the risk exposure. In addition to that, it also gives you a better return. So they started using as a speculative instrument as well. Later on, it was even used for arbitrage purposes. Arbitrage, the word arbitrage, whenever you hear it, you need to remember two things. One is It is a short-term opportunity. It's not going to last for long. It's a short-term opportunity, a short window. Next, it happens because of a price discrepancy in two unpenetrable markets. In other words, the two markets have to be separate. It shouldn't be that that one can leak into another. The two markets have to be distinguished and separate. And the two markets should have a price discrepancy. Hence, you buy in one market and sell in another market and earn a profit. So these three purposes are for which the derivatives are used. What are the main four categories of derivatives? Forward, futures, options and swaps. Currently, in Sri Lankan context, it's forward and a bit of swap that you see across in your treasury. Futures and options, not so much. But if you take the Indian market, especially the Indian stock exchange, they do have futures and options being added on. Forward contracts, again, when I say forward contracts, there are certain key elements that need to be highlighted in your mind. It is a derivative, but it's a binding derivative. You have to honor that particular derivative. You cannot get out from the contract. Next, forward contracts are customized for your nature. So what's tailor-made for you cannot be given to somebody else. For example, you try to stitch clothes, you try to stitch yourself a particular suit. So when they stitch your according to your measurements, and if you don't want it, obviously the tailor can't sell it to somebody else. You have to take it whether you like it or whether you fit into it or not. Because for your requirement, it was tailor-made. Similarly, forward contracts also, it's customized, made for the customer's requirement. So what's made for you, once committed, you cannot back off. But what are the positives of this? In a forward contract, until the forward date, you don't have to make any cash commitment, no any payments until the maturity of the forward contract. But in the others, not so. Futures, we saw you had some margin requirements. Options, there were option premium. In forward contract, no. That doesn't mean that in forwards banks don't earn a commission. They do. But not on the day that you enter into the forward contract. It's on the day of the maturity, the day of the settlement, that they would charge you a commission. So day one or until maturity, there is no any payment involved. Futures contract. Very similar to forwards, but there are certain differences. What are the main differences, tell me? It's a standardized contract. Forward contract, it was tailor-made for your purpose, for the customer's purpose. But futures contract is a standard contract. It's in standard packages. You have to choose the package which will suit your requirement the most. They do not tailor make it, they do not customize it. Because it is standardized, of course, it's easily tradable in the market. So the customers could trade their futures on an exchange. It's not an over-the-counter market. Hence, we consider it to be less risky than the forward contract. The third one, futures, because it is traded in an exchange. Think of a share. We saw the share stock exchange, right? So similar to that, think about the share of a company. Share of a company, you can only buy one share. It has to be 1, 2, 3 in whole numbers. You can't buy a share, you can't buy half a share, you can't buy a quarter of a share. No. It's a standard contract. It's a standard instrument. Similar to that, futures contract also is a standard contract. Hence, because it's standardized, it's easy to trade in a market. Why? If you want, you could buy it. But if it's tailor-made, you can't trade it in a market. Now, because you're trading it in the market, the prices of the futures will fluctuate every day. Hence, if you are selling or buying the futures, you have to mark to market your position every day until the settlement occurs. Why? The prices fluctuate. So you book whether it's a gain or a loss to you. It's very similar. For your understanding purpose, I'm relating it to the shares. Let's say I bought a share today at 10 rupees. Tomorrow the price goes to 12. I still didn't sell it. But I know, look here, I made 2 rupees gain. The very next day it goes to 9, which means I lost 3 rupees. The 2 rupee of my gain and 1 rupee from my capital. Okay, just like that, futures are also mark to market each day. Finally, the most important difference between futures and forwards is, for forwards we saw no any payment until maturity, but here you have a margin requirement. You have something called the initial margin when you enter into a future contract. Why do they have it? To ensure the commitment to the futures. Okay, to ensure the commitment, you need to place some kind of a margin to show your ability to honor. That's so. If you trade, of course, there's no any initial margin. So if you sell off your future contract, no. After that, you don't have to hold. Okay, so initial margin is like the initial deposit you have for a current account. Okay, every day when you mark to market, if it's a gain, it will go above or it will go higher than the initial margin. If it's a loss, it will reduce from the initial margin. Can you see here? From the initial margin, due to the losses, it's reducing. But there is always, now for a current account or any account you hold, there is a minimum balance, right? If you go to your ATM and try to withdraw below your minimum balance, they don't let you. Just like that, here also, you have something called a maintenance margin. Now, this maintenance margin has to be maintained across your future contract period. It cannot be breached. So, let's say your initial margin, the amount that you put as initial margin, is now reducing due to the losses. The exchange will allow it to reduce, no problem. But moment it reduces than the maintenance margin, let's say maintenance margin is $100, your initial margin, which was $200, has now come up to $110. Now margin available is 110, your maintenance margin requirement is 100, so only a a $10 buffer is available. Let's say there's another loss the next day, a $10 loss. Now your margin balance is 100, your maintenance margin is also 100. Still no issue. Let's say the very next day, again there's another $10 loss, which makes your account to go to $90. Whereas the maintenance margin requirement says, look here, you have to maintain $100. Moment it happens, moment your balance hits below the maintenance margin, you get a margin call requesting you to replace or replenish the amount that was lost due to the losses. So when you reimburse to the margin, can you meet only up to the maintenance margin? No. You have to top up until the initial margin level. The amount you top up is called the variation margin. Now remember very carefully, because so many students, they understand all the other margin terms. What they miss is the variation margin. For variation margin, two mistakes. They think it's the top up to maintenance margin, which is wrong. Next, they think variation margin is simply they write the difference to top up. No, you have to top up until the initial margin. The key word there is top up until initial margin. So that difference, the entire difference where you have to top up until initial margin, is the variation margin requirement. So what is your role in studying this? You have to know the terms that's meant by each of these and how it operates. What do you mean by a margin call? When do you get a margin call? And when a margin call comes, what do you need to do? You need to top up until initial margin, which is called the variation margin. Next, we saw an example on how the mark to market works. I hope you understood that. And then we moved on to option. Now, this was a larger topic. We took a lot of time discussing about this. But options is a very different derivative than the first two. Why? As the name suggests, you have your option whether to honor the contract or not. Okay, you have the right to decide whether I exercise this contract or not. You have the option. But what is the tricky part here is, remember, for a contract, there is always two parties. To any contract, minimum you have two parties. If both the parties have the option, the contract will never work out. Why? In a contract, usually one party who might be losing, other party might be gaining. So if both are having the option to decide whether to exercise or not, it's very difficult to execute the transaction. So what happens here is, it is the buyer or the holder of the derivative who gets the power or the right to decide. The seller of the derivative, because he is selling the derivative, he doesn't have an option. He doesn't have a right to decide whether to execute or not. He is obligated. If the buyer decides to honor it, he has to honor it. If the buyer decides to cancel, he has to bear the loss. So the seller of the option, seller of the derivative has the obligation. But the buyer or the holder of the option or the derivative has the right to decide whether to exercise the option or not. Now, option can be of two types. The option can give the holder the right to buy something, to buy the underlying asset, or it can give the holder the right to sell the underlying asset. Depending on that, the type of option will vary. If you are talking about a call option, then you need to understand the holder has the right to buy the underlying asset, which means that he doesn't have this underlying asset with him at the moment. So he will buy this asset from the seller. What do you mean by put option? Put option gives you the right to sell the underlying asset, which means that the holder of the option, be careful with the words, okay? Holder of the option should be having that underlying asset with them at the moment, okay? So using this option, they can sell the underlying asset to the seller of the option, okay? So that is one type of options. What is the next type available? Depending on the time period to exercise your option. There is an option called American option and there's something called European option. Now, how I used to remember as a student is, if you take the two cultures, the American culture is very democratic, very liberal, very, they love to do anything, very, the freedom is very high. European are usually uptight, they are very strict. So if you remember that two classification itself, you will understand these two options. The American option gives the holder the ability to exercise the option at any time between buying the option until maturity. So until maturity, any particular day, the holder can exercise. But European option, no, it doesn't give such a benefit. What does it say? Look here, European option says you have to exercise only on the maturity or the expiration date. You cannot exercise before the maturity date. So imagine the market is not so good on the expiry date. Then the holder has to avoid the option. But if you take the American option, the holder can monitor the movement and decide the optimum time to exercise the option. So just by looking at it, American and European option, which option will carry the highest premium? An American option would carry a higher premium. Why? You have the benefit of exercising at any time until maturity. Third classification of options is in the money and out of the money. This again you need to remember. In the money means the option is lucrative. The option is giving you a better return. It's giving a better return to who? To the holder. Out of the money means the option is giving you a loss. Hence, you are out of money. Simply. Okay. So, out of money option means it's an option which is not so lucrative, an option that's not giving you much gain. Okay. In such a scenario, we call it the out of money option. If in case they use the word at the money option, that means it's a no profit, no loss option. Okay. So in the money means you are in a gain, you are earning a better return. Out of the money, you are earning a loss. At the money, it means you are in a break even, no profit, no loss. Now, whether an option is giving you a profit, whether the option is giving you a loss, whether the option is giving you no profit, no loss, depends on whether the option is a call option or a put option. So that's what this diagram tells you. A call option in a situation where call option gives you a better return is, you're trying to buy something, right? So lower the price, higher return it is. Okay. If the option price is lower than the current market price, better return. But think about a put option. The option's price is very low than the current market price. Is it better for you? You're trying to sell. You're trying to sell at a low price. No, you try to sell at a higher price. So remember, in what scenario in the money, out of the money, and at the money occurs for call option and put option. Finally, the diagrammatical view or the profit or loss of options is displayed here for your understanding. How the buyer of a call option will bear a loss on what situation and on what situation they will earn a profit. Same scenario on what kind of a price the buyer of a put option will face a loss and a profit. Seller or writer, when they sell a call option or a put option, on what scenario do they earn a return and on what scenario do they earn a loss? Again, I highlighted a lot of important things in this diagram. Seller or writer, writing an option means you're trying to sell the option. You are the seller of the option. So the term writer, writing, you have to take note. And another one I keep highlighting is, can you see here that a seller, option seller's profit is capped or limited to the premium that they charge. This is the maximum that they can earn. So the seller has to decide the premium that they are going to charge. But look at the buyer here. For the buyer, the loss is limited. Loss is limited to what amount? Loss is limited to the premium amount. Why? If the option is unfavorable, they can always back out from the option. Why? They have the right to say no. But if they do, what is the loss for them? The premium they paid for the option at the time of purchasing. So unlike forwards, here also on the day you enter into the option, you have to pay a premium. Forwards, no such a thing. Next, we saw when you're pricing the options, when you're trying to price the option premium, what are the factors that you will consider? Under the rationale behind pricing option premiums is, if the option has a better chance of providing a higher gain to the holder, the seller will definitely charge a higher premium. Simple as that. Now, if I have an instrument, okay, I am the owner of that instrument. I know if I sell this to one of you, you will get a better return or it's more useful to you. I know that. Then will I sell this instrument at a low price? No. I know that this instrument is important to you. I know this instrument will give you better money in the future. So I will definitely charge higher. If I know that this instrument is not so useful to you, might not give you return, might end up in a loss, then I cannot ask you to pay higher because even you are informed in the market. You as an informed buyer will know whether this instrument is useful to you or not. Hence, the seller doesn't have the ability to charge higher. That's the underlying rationale behind this. So, in the money option will carry a higher premium than out of the money option. American option would carry a higher premium than a European option. If the time to expiry is very long, then such an option will carry a higher premium than the other. If the strike price is very high, what do you mean by strike price? It's the price at which you will exercise your option. If that price is very high than the current market price, the premium will be higher for put option, not for buy. If the strike price is very low than the current ongoing price, then the premium will be higher for the call option. Okay? So these you have to read carefully at the exam, understand whether the holder, the buyer of the option is getting a better return or is going to end up at a loss. Depending on that, your option premium pricing will change. Then we start off from swaps. This is where we need to continue. Just a recap of what we did on the last class. So swap is another type of a derivative, yes. But here, what you're trying to do is, you do enter into an agreement and you try to exchange. Okay, you try to exchange what you have with the other person. It can be an asset, it can be a cash flow series, it can be an interest rate. Okay, for a specified time period, you exchange it. That's what a swap is. That's what a swap is. Now, for the example, let's say I have a housing loan. My housing loan is a fixed rate housing loan. You also have a housing loan, which is a floating rate housing loan. Assume that both our housing loan amounts, the loan amount is the same. 10 million, the tenor is the same, all other features are same, only the rate is different. Now, as a fixed interest rate paying borrower, I am of the view in the future interest rate will come down further. You as a borrower who's paying a floating interest rate, your view could be, look here, in the future interest rates are going to increase. With this crisis situation, you would think, okay, maybe they can't sustain this inflation, the interest rate has to go up. I would think no, as a way to promote more economic growth, they will maintain the interest rate as this level. Both are having a different thinking. Now, I am getting fixed, but I prefer floating. Why? In the future, when I expect the interest rates to come down, you are getting floating rate, you're paying floating, but you want to get fixed. In other words, you're paying a floating interest rate, but you prefer a fixed interest rate. Why? You expect the rate to go up. So both of us could swap our interest rate payment. Why? Our capital is the same, tenor is the same, everything is the same. So I would tell you, look here, I will pay your interest, you will pay my interest. Depending on the protocol or depending on whose overview in the future is working out, one party will benefit, other party will be losing. But you get, what's the benefit of it? You get what you forecasted or what you expected. That's what happens in a swap. Why is swap very, least used instrument? Because it's practically difficult for swap to happen between two commercial entities, which is the two non-banking commercial entities. Why? In our example, even you could see so many scenarios which is unlikely to happen. Our loan amounts being the same, our loan periods being the same, both of us knowing that each other has that requirement, all those might not happen in the real financial market. So swap in particular in our local context is not used much. But under the umbrella of swaps, the most used swap is the interest rate swap, what we discussed here. A party who receives fixed who wants to pay floating, so they will nullify that. So I will receive I have to pay I pay fixed, sorry, in my example, I pay fixed rate to the bank. Okay. Now I ask you to pay on behalf of me and I will pay your interest. Okay. So what happens? For me, my exposure is a floating rate exposure. For you, you wanted a fixed, you are now getting a fixed rate exposure. That's what happens in a interest rate swap. You exchange one set of interest payment for another set of interest payment. But remember, all will be at the same denomination and the same loan amount. It cannot differ. Okay, the loan periods, everything has to match for this to happen. That's why I'm telling you it's very rare for two individual people to do a swap. Individual person and a bank can do the swap. That's what we do here. Swap arranged by a third party, where the bank acts as the swap agent. Why? The bank, remember, they address the maturity mismatch, they address all those mismatch concerns. So the bank is comfortable enough to meet all those differences. Hence, having a bank in between as well, you can do the swap. Next mostly used swap is the foreign currency swap. Here, what is the difference is, you are exchanging two streams of cash flows. But one stream is in one set of currency, other stream is in another set of currency. For example, let's say based in Sri Lanka, a company wants to invest in United Kingdom. Let's not go too far. A company in Sri Lanka wants to invest in India. A company in India wants to invest in Sri Lanka. Now for them, they have to convert their Indian rupees into LKR and invest. For us, we have to convert our LKR into Indian rupees and invest. What we could do is, we could enter into a swap where the other party, the Indian party, can use our rupees, our company rupees to do their investment, and we could use the Indian company's INR or Indian rupees to use for the Indian investment. But what is the important thing? The amounts have to be the same. You cannot have one party cannot end up paying higher than the other. Those have to be similar or acceptable. The currencies, of course, can change. They do it based on one agreed exchange rate. So they can avoid the fluctuating exchange rates in the market. Finally, we have cap floors and collars. This is also another type of derivative used to manage risk exposures. What do you mean by cap? Something that you put on your head. Flow is, of course, the flow at the bottom. Collar is something like in between. Why am I explaining this to you? If you have this in your mind, it's easier for you to understand what's going to come next. A cap, specifically interest cap. What do you mean by interest cap? Is if the interest rate is escalating at a very high pace or it's increasing and a party wants to stop that increase, then they could buy a interest rate cap. When you see the diagram here, in the market, interest rate is continuously increasing. Okay. You have borrowed money at a floating interest rate. Okay. You have bought money from a floating interest rate. Which means if the market interest rate is increasing, you have to pay a higher interest as well. you could buy a interest rate cap, which means they will put a ceiling. This is the maximum interest rate we will charge from you. So moment they put a cap, even though market rate goes above that, you don't get charged by that. You will only get charged by the cap rate. What is the floor rate? If the interest rate is continuously declining, okay, interest rate is continuously declining, and you don't want it to occur, you want to have a minimum interest rate, then you could buy a floor rate and set a minimum interest rate. Now let's see who will buy a cap rate, who will buy a floor rate. Now think about the cap rate scenario. In the market, interest rate was 8, then quickly it moved to 9, now it's past 10, going up to 11, now reaching 12. Somebody wants to limit this interest rate. Who would want to limit the interest rate? Of course, the borrower. Why? They have to pay the interest, so they have to pay a higher interest. So a borrower of the loan would prefer to buy the interest rate cap. If I have a loan from a bank and the bank loan is a floating rate, in January I paid 8%, February I paid 9, March I paid 10, April I paid 11, May I paid 12. So every time it's increasing. I want to limit that increase. So I could approach the bank and buy an interest rate cap, and let's say they give 10%. So even though in April and May market rate have gone to 11 and 12, I still keep paying 10% to the bank. I have managed my risk, and of course if the interest rate is increasing higher, I will get a better return or a better gain as well. Now who will use a floating rate? Market rates are continuously decreasing and you want to fix a minimum interest rate. Will a borrower do that? I have a loan, market interest rates are continuously declining. It was 5, now 4, now let's say it's 3%. Do you want to say no, market rate is continuously declining? Can you put a floor rate at 5%? So even though market rate goes below that, I still continue to pay 5. Will a borrower say that? No. This floor rate is beneficial for financial institutions which give out loans. Why? In a period where loan rate or the interest rate is decreasing, the return on their asset, what is the asset? Their loan book. The return on their loan book is declining. To avoid that, to limit it, to ensure that there is a stable income, a bank would want to buy a floor rate. Now remember, for a bank, it's a benefit. But to the borrower, it's a loss. Why? Even though rates continuously decline, they now don't get that benefit. Why? They have a minimum interest rate that they have to pay. You see the diagram here, even though the interest rate goes to 7, interest rate goes to 6, they still have to pay 8% to the bank. So the borrower is at a issue. All right. So you have to understand who will buy a cap, who will buy a floor. See, financial institution purchase floors when they have fixed cost of liabilities and have variable or floating returns on the assets. So they want to limit it. Why? Now, if they have fixed cost in liabilities, the liabilities will have to be paid at that particular rate. What are their liabilities? Their deposits. Their FD rates are all fixed, but their loan book is at a floating rate. So if the rates keep declining, they don't have adequate return to pay their deposit interest. So to avoid that, to avoid such a loss situation, they could buy the floor rate. Now, what is a collar? Collar is when you have both these cap and flow agreements. If there is a cap imposed and a flow imposed, we say it's a collar agreement. So, even though interest rates goes higher, the maximum is the cap rate. Even though interest rate declines below the floor, the minimum rate is the floor rate. So only the movement between this boundary is recorded or deducted from the borrower. So there is a guide. There is a scenario where the borrower will benefit. There is a scenario where the bank will benefit as well. It's on for a negotiation way. It's a better proposition to go. Okay. So with that, we are done with derivatives, and today we are going to focus on the foreign exchange market. One of the most talked about, most hyped topics recently. I hope you got a good understanding on structured finance product and derivatives. Now we are approaching a totally different market. Okay, so in derivative and structured finance product, the thinking that you had is of a one rationale. There your motive was you have certain unique requirements as an investor, as a borrower, as a market participant. To address that, you have certain financial products tailor-made for your requirements. Some are standardized. Now we are going to the foreign exchange market. This is one of the largest financial markets in the world. Why? This market is the market for currencies. Dollar, British pounds, euro, yen, yuan, every currency is recorded under the foreign exchange market. It's one of the most volatile and one of the largest financial markets. What is the instrument that we are talking here? We are the underlining instrument, or that's not the correct term to use. The instrument that we are talking or we are trading here is foreign exchange. It can be in dollar terms, euro terms, as long as it is foreign exchange, foreign currency, currency which is not Sri Lankan rupee, it falls into the foreign exchange market. Now, why do we need foreign exchange? I'm pretty sure the current scenario would help you to address the importance of foreign exchange we have. Foreign exchange, especially for open economy, especially when globalization is taking place at a rapid manner, where you have to buy certain goods and services from companies or entities located from abroad, you have to pay them in their currency. If you are buying something from China, can you give them Sri Lankan rupees? What will they do with rupees in China? You have to pay them in their country's currency. What will, if you want to buy something from America, can you pay in Sri Lankan rupees? What will they do with rupees in America? You have to pay them in their country's currency. So if you want to buy goods and services which are produced and given by foreign entities, by foreign countries, then you definitely have a requirement of foreign exchange. Why? You have to pay them in foreign currency. Simple example, you're getting a vehicle down from Japan. Can you pay them in Sri Lankan rupees? No, you have to pay in Japanese yen, which means you need to have Japanese yen to make the payment. Who do you approach? You only have rupees in your pocket. You will approach the foreign exchange market, say, look here, I have rupees. Can you sell me some yen? And you will buy the yen and make the importation. So for you to make these purchases, you need foreign exchange, you need foreign currency in the local market. In Sri Lanka, you need to have dollars, you need to have yuan, you need to have renminbi, you need to have yen, euro, pounds, all those currencies have to be there if Sri Lanka wants to buy certain foreign products. So how will we earn this foreign currency? How do we manage that? We can't print foreign currency. No, the sovereign mandate is to print the local currency. So how do we earn foreign exchange? The main way to earn it is exports. That's why exports are encouraged by our country. Because export is the single largest window which gives us the needed foreign currency, because they sell to the foreigners and earn the dollars. When you sell a tea packet to America, can you charge them in rupees? Do they have rupees to pay you? No, they will have dollars. So you will of course charge in dollars for them. If you approach certain hotels, for tourists, when they stay, they charge in dollar terms. Why? They have dollars in their hands. So through these ways, foreign currency enter into Sri Lanka. Another method is investments. Foreigners would want to invest in Sri Lanka, then of course they will bring their dollars and make investment here. So when they have to make their investment, it has been done in rupees. They can't buy land and they can't buy land and equipment in dollars. No? They will have to convert their dollars into rupees to make the purchase. So in that scenario, dollar will come into the country. Thirdly, the biggest flow of foreign currency inflow, the worker remittances from Middle East. What they earn, they will remit to their loved ones here. Of course, they need rupees to survive in Sri Lanka, to buy things in Sri Lanka. So they will have to convert the foreign currency in rupees in the country. So this is how foreign currency enter into our market, and this is how foreign currency is sent out of our market. This market is one of the most active and very volatile market. Why? Every day there will be millions of transactions involving several currencies. So the liquidity of the market is very, very high. Because it's one of the largest markets, can we say no, this only has to happen in a central location? You have to come there if you want to buy foreign currency. If not, we don't give. No. Forex market is an over-the-counter market. You can approach the authorized dealers located in the country and get the foreign currency according to your requirement. Foreign currency market can be at first instance divided into two. You have a spot forex market, you have a forward forex market. What do you mean by spot market or the spot forex market? Just like the word says, on the spot. Immediately you do your transaction and your settlement. Forward market meaning You enter into the agreement today, but you do the settlement or the delivery at a future date. That's what you call a forward forex market. See the differences? In a spot forex market, they will only handle transactions that are going to happen now. For example, there'll be, let's say one of you wants to pay subscription for a broad qualification that you got. Another one of you wants to import vehicles. Now you want to pay your subscription immediately. You want to bring down the vehicle in 3 months. So the rate I give to you, to the student who wants to pay their subscription today, is not the same rate I will give to the importer who wants to bring down the vehicle in 3 months. Why? I told you this market is highly volatile. The rate I give today might not be the rate in 3 months. So when I give the rate today, the spot rate is different than the forward rate. Why? I will give you a future rate. I will have to calculate and tell you, okay, in 3 months down the line, this is the exchange rate we expect. But for the student who wants to make the subscription today, we will immediately give the rate that is currently being traded in the market to do the payment. So spot market handles current transactions. Forward market handles transactions where the contract occurs today, but implementation or the settlement occurs in the future. Now the rate that you get in the spot market is called the spot rate. The rate you get in a forward market is a forward rate. And another biggest difference is in the spot market, your transaction occurs at the existing ongoing exchange rate. But in the forward market, your transaction will not occur today. It will occur in the future at the future rate quoted. Okay, I hope it's clear for you. Now, this is theoretically and I'm explaining it to you. I have told you the practical side as well. Practically, when we say spot market, now I say immediately we do the transaction. Yes, but just think about this scenario. You have someone, now you want to pay your subscription. Okay, your subscription, let's say, should go to Canada. You make the, let's say you make the payment today on Friday, and on Canada, today is a holiday, banks are closed. So what happens is, even though we say spot market, spot rate, it takes the next 2 days for your transaction to actually occur, for the settlement to occur. Why? To accommodate for the geographical and the timing differences. All right. So, for a context, we say spot means immediate. Yes. But understand, if you get a spot rate or the spot date, it is 2 days from today. Why? In case there is a variation, there is 2 additional days as buffer. Okay. Forward market is very different. Not even 2 days. It has to be more than 2 days. Okay. Spot market, even though we say immediate, we say T plus 2. The 2 days are provided for considering the geographical differences. Now, first instance we saw it's over the counter market, and we saw it's spot, and there is 2 types of variations in the forex market. You have the spot market to do your immediate transactions, then you have your forward market to do your future transactions. So how else is this foreign exchange market structured? We know the location is over the counter. So location wise, we understood, I explained it to you before as well. It is a over the counter market. It's not a central location for you to do your transaction. Who are the participants that we can see in the foreign exchange market? I told you there are exporters, investors, worker remittances. Yes, but we are now going to see categorically who are the participants that we can see in the market, who will demand for foreign currency and who will supply foreign currencies to the market. The very first type, what is the very first type? Consumers and travelers. Now, when you and I go abroad, we will have certain foreign currency with us for spending. For that purpose, we would demand foreign currency when we are going to go abroad. When we go for a visit and come back, we will have some foreign currency with us left, which we want to give and get rupees. So in that situation, we become suppliers of foreign currency. Okay. Similar to that, you have certain consumers. Certain consumers who want to buy small purchases, not huge ones, like small earrings, certain smaller quantities they want to buy. They could, of course, have an account in which they could use to buy their requirement, buy their essentials. Next, you will have certain relatives who will get gifts in foreign currency. They would also supply foreign currency to the market. So consumers and travelers are not a predominant participant in the market. But understand, yes, they are also available there in the market. The most predominant participant is exporter and importer. Exporter comes as a supplier of foreign currency. Importer comes demanding for foreign currency. Exporter will sell the foreign currency which they earn. Importer wants to buy the foreign currency so they can pay and bring down goods and services. You have to remember who sells and who buys foreign currency. I have not yet used the term rupees yet. Sri Lankan rupees, no. Always think about the foreign currency. Exporter will sell a bag of tea in terms of dollars and will get the dollars and come here. Can he work with dollars? No, he needs in rupees to pluck tea, to pack and do everything. So he has to convert. Okay. Importer, he wants to bring down a vehicle from Japan. Can he pay Japan in rupees? No, he needs to pay in their own currency. So they will buy the foreign currency from the market. Now, there are two terms in foreign currency now, depreciation and appreciation. I hope you have learned this under economics in IABF level. Depreciation and appreciation. When you just say the two words, it might not mean so much. But remember, in the foreign currency market, you always have to relate the depreciation with the currency. What currency is depreciating? What currency is appreciating? Now, if you take the Sri Lankan rupee, if I say Sri Lankan rupee depreciated, is it a good thing? What am I meaning by Sri Lankan rupee depreciated? I am telling you, look here, for 1 Sri Lankan rupee, the amount of dollars that I could buy has now reduced further. The value of the external value of the currency has come down. What do I mean by appreciation of local currency? or appreciation of Sri Lankan rupee. For 1 Sri Lankan rupee, the amount of dollars that I could buy has increased, which means the external value of Sri Lankan rupee has increased. Now, looking at this, what can you say about the Sri Lankan rupee? It has depreciated. Why has it depreciated? Earlier, I can buy $1 with 190 rupees. If I go to the bank counter and give 190 rupees, they can give me $1. But now when I go with 190 rupees, they say, no, you have to give me 10 rupees more if you want to buy $1. It means two things. It means that Sri Lankan rupee has depreciated. Even though the number has increased, remember, it has depreciated. I have to pay more to buy $1. It also means that dollar's value has appreciated. Earlier, I can buy the dollar with only just 190, but now I have to pay more to get that $1, which means the value of the dollar has appreciated. Why I'm telling you this is the word appreciated and the depreciated, it can differ according to the context you use. So if you see here, I can make two statements. I can say dollar appreciated, Sri Lankan rupee depreciated. Okay. Now, if let's say something like this is happening, who is going to benefit? Who is going to lose? Now, a person who has US dollars, let's say I have one US dollar, okay? If I go try to sell it to somebody else, I can sell it only for 190. But now I can get 10 rupees more. So for a person who has foreign currency, listen to it carefully. The person who has foreign currency will benefit if the local currency is depreciating. Now think about the exporter who earns in dollars. Okay, when they earn in dollars, let's say he has got $1. Last month when he came, he only got 190 for that. But today when he comes, he will get 200. So depreciation of rupee, but exporter is benefiting. Let's say the other way about. $200 has now come up to 180, which means the rupee appreciated and the dollar or the dollar depreciated. Now this will affect the exporter. Why? This month he got 200 for the $1 he gave. Next month when he comes, he will only get 180. Now think about the importer. Importer, it's a totally different scenario. For an importer, it's better if rupee appreciates. Why? Let's say he can buy one car, let's say he can assume, okay, they can buy one car for $1. So to buy that one car, he had to pay 200 rupees, but now he can only pay 180 and get that car. So when the rupee appreciates, the importer benefits. It's a vice versa situation. So exporter sells foreign currency and he benefits with the depreciation of the local currency. For now, omit counter and the base currency. I will explain to you what it is. Just read through the others. So exporter will benefit from depreciation of local currency, and he will lose when local currency appreciates. Okay, he will benefit if the local currency depreciates or the foreign currency appreciates, and he will lose when the opposite happens. Importer buys foreign currency, and he or she will benefit from the depreciation of the foreign currency or appreciation of the local currency. Okay, and not only that, not only the direct remittances that they bring or the direct purchases that the importers do, exporter and importer also get involved in the forex market via the derivative market, especially the forward contracts. Then we have banks. What do banks do? Especially in foreign currency, they are an intermediary. Okay, they buy and they sell foreign currency. Now understand what the banks do. What do? They buy foreign currency in their own name. They don't do a brokering service. No, they don't do that. They directly deal in foreign currency. That's why they are called authorized dealers. There is a difference between dealers and brokers. Dealers are parties who directly get involved, who will buy in their own name and sell in their own name. For example, let's say that in the real estate market, you could see this difference very highly. Now, let's say there's a house for sale. One person can act as a broker. He can find buyers and bring it to the seller, and they can negotiate, fix the deal, and the broker will get commission. Broker only gave that opportunity for both the parties to meet. What will a real estate dealer do? A real estate dealer, what they would do is, when they know that there is a house for sale, they will buy that house first in their name. Okay, they will buy that house, they will refurbish that house entirely, make all the adjustments, and they will sell again to another party at a better price and earn a profit. See the difference? Broker gets commission, dealer gets profit. It's not mandatory for them to make any adjustments, but even if they keep it as it is and sell, yet again it gets a profit for them on price appreciation. Same thing is done by banks. What they do is they buy dollars. People's Bank, Bank of Ceylon, they buy dollars in their own name. They keep it with themselves, and they will sell dollars or sell foreign currency to their customers. Hence, banks may play a major role as authorized dealers. Not only that, banks sometimes engaged in proprietary trading. What is called proprietary trading? Proprietary trading means they do investments which will get them profits. They do trading using the foreign currency in their own name to earn a profit. That's what you call proprietary trading. They don't act on behalf of somebody else. No. They do it in their own name for their own return requirement. Okay. Even for that, banks get involved. Finally, the interbank forex market is a highly liquid forex segment that's available in the forex market. While interbank, they could buy and sell forex as well. Broker in the context of foreign currency market, is being very, now the role of a broker is being very less. Why? Earlier there was, but now because there are so many banks and technologically advanced platforms are here, the method for the buyer and the seller to meet is already created. Hence, a broker's requirement is not so much in the current context. But understand, brokers also used to get involved in forex market, where if a person has a requirement, they will fish around and find somebody else so that they could meet that requirement, and by arranging the meet, the broker will get the commission. Investors and speculators. Here, investors, they want to make FDI a permanent investment in Sri Lanka, or they could get involved on speculatory motive. They know there's a short-term gain on this. To get that gain also, they could participate in the foreign currency market if they know. Now, for example, now during I think September 2017, 2015, yes, September 2015 is when the rupee was floated. They moved to a floating exchange rate. So at that time, rupee to dollar was 133. You can buy $1 for 133 rupees. Right after floating, it moved down to 150. Now this idea to float the rupee was always there. It was lurking in the background. If the speculators had caught it on time, they could of course buy the dollars, hold the dollars that they had and sell after the announcement is made, or sell after the regime change is done. What I mean by regime change is when they move to a floating exchange rate, okay? When they move to a floating exchange rate, they could, of course, sell their dollars and get a higher or abnormal return than the less informed participants in the market. Investors, they bring their foreign currency investment to the local country. So, of course, they have to convert, and through that, they enter the forex market. Finally, you have central bank. Central bank, along with the government, of course, they involved in the foreign currency market. Why? What is their primary concern is? Their primary concern is to maintain the external value of Sri Lankan rupee. To ensure that that is maintained, and also they want to maintain their reserves. For those two purposes, central bank will of course involve in the foreign currency market, where they will sometimes buy forex or sometimes sell forex to address the volatility in the market. Foreign exchange dealers, we were learning that just a while ago. Foreign exchange dealers are traders who buy and sell foreign currencies in their own name. They specifically buy dollars for them and then they sell dollars as well. Now, if they are dealing in foreign currency, will they buy and sell at the same rate? Of course, no. They will buy at a low rate and sell at a higher rate. The difference being their margin. Okay. Now, depending on a foreign currency dealer's position, what I mean by position, the trading position, you can see or you can identify their expectation behind the trading. For example, if you get a foreign currency dealer whose net position, what do I mean by net position? On day end, when they tally their trades, the net position is a long position. The technical word, net position is long. What does it mean? It means that you have bought the foreign currency more. than what you have sold. What does it tell you? Why does someone buy the foreign currency? If you can see a net position long in a foreign exchange dealer, you can identify that they expect the foreign currency to appreciate in the future. That's why they're accumulating at the moment. If you see the net position, the end of day's trading, and see it as a short position. What do I mean by short position? They have sold more foreign currency than what they bought, which means they are reducing their reserves or reducing the foreign currency that they hold. What would that indicate to you? That will indicate to you, look here, they are expecting the foreign currency to depreciate in the future. Hence, they want to sell off the foreign currency before such depreciation occurs. Squared position. This means your net position is zero. What you have bought today is entirely sold off today as well. This position is taken as a hedging technique to manage your risk exposure. Let's say you are in a net position long and all of a sudden foreign currency depreciates, the dealer will face huge losses. So on a squared position, if the net position is zero, of course, you don't take on any additional risk. Your risk appetite is intact. To hedge your risk exposure for exchange rate movements, the dealers could maintain a squared or net position zero. Objectives of the regulations in the foreign currency market. Why does regulators, central bank or government involved to regulate the foreign currency market? I told you before as well, it hits the country in two aspects. It decides the external value of the local currency. Next, it affects the reserves of the country. Thereafter, there are certain other concerns as well. You can see currently, if you don't have dollars, if you don't have foreign currency, your importation ability is lost, living standards are reduced, cost of living can increase, all those matters are involved. So, now with that context, with that background, let's get into why do they have to regulate the forex market. The first and foremost is they do not want the domestic currency to appreciate excessively. Now look here, if they ask this question at the exam and if you just write ensure domestic currency doesn't appreciate, that's wrong. What their objective is to ensure that it doesn't appreciate excessively. Why? What is the reason behind that? In a background or in a situation where domestic currency appreciates significantly, what happens is the exporter is discouraged. Exporter has dollars. When he comes to convert, domestic currency is more appreciated. So he will get less rupees. He can't do business. Who gets the benefit in this appreciation? The importer. Now they can import by paying less rupees. So imagine if the domestic currency is allowed to appreciate excessively, what could happen is the country will become an import dependent country, an excessively import dependent country. To avoid that and to ensure that exporters are not discouraged, the domestic currency has to be maintained specifically without letting it to appreciate excessively. Allow the pursuit of independent monetary policy in deciding exchange rate. So they want, the objective of regulating the forex market is to ensure that exchange rates are decided based on market demand or the market pressures or market flows and not tampering into the exchange rate. Reduce excessive inflow of foreign capital. This again, why do they need it? So that it doesn't appreciate the Sri Lankan rupee or it doesn't appreciate the domestic currency excessively. Finally, alleviate the forex funding shortages of banks which have experienced severe dollar shortages, especially in periods of crisis. Similar to what's happening right now, we have a dollar liquidity shortage at the moment. So if you as a banker should of course know what's happening in your branches. Due to the dollar shortages, the banks are being very prudent on when they manage their foreign currency requirements, foreign currency demands. Okay, so to address those issues also, you have to regulate the forex market. You can see a good example of that happening at the moment when the banks are struggling with low dollar inflow. There is regulations being brought forward by central bank mandating conversion of dollar to rupees by exporters. So all those regulations are needed to address this funding shortage. So how can they regulate the forex market? There are three ways in which they could regulate the forex market. First is of course the direct intervention by central bank. If they are of the view that the local currency has depreciated or appreciated to an unhealthy level, of course they will get involved and take a buying position or a selling position to adjust and address the volatility issue or the unhealthy level of appreciation or depreciation occurring at the market. So to address that, they could directly involve and buy and sell forex accordingly so that the situation is resolved. Direct control. So with the Foreign Exchange Act passed out in around 2018, yes, 2018, 2019 levels, yes. So using the Foreign Exchange Act, they of course could impose their powers, imposing regulations, imposing rules on conversion, on ways in which forex should be handled. Finally, moral suasion. What is moral suasion? Central bank or government could provide advice, instructions to commercial banks asking them to act in a particular method, act in a particular way so that the forex market volatility is addressed. So in moral suasion, it's not a regulation. They instruct the banks, look here, this situation would be resolved if you do this. It's an advisory role that they play. Now with all this in mind, now we are going to go to exchange rate. This is the heart of the market. What is the heart of the market? The exchange rate. We are talking about the foreign currency market. So you are trading currencies in this market. So at what price do you trade these currency? That price is called exchange rate. Price of one currency in terms of the other. Now, usually in foreign textbooks specifically, you will see you will say the exchange rate denoted in this manner. Let me see whether I could zoom. Yeah. What does it mean? It means that 1 euro is equal to 1.416 of US dollars. The slash refers to as per. So 1 euro per euro is equal to $1.416. That's the exchange rate. Understand the exchange rate. Now this particular exchange rate can be denoted as a direct quote or as a indirect quote. How do you know whether it's a direct or an indirect quote? It depends on how it's denoted in relation to the local currency. Direct quote tells you, this direct quote is the widely used quote. It tells you how much of local currency that needs to be paid to buy one foreign currency. Now, why is direct quote used more than the other two types? Think about this scenario. When you go to a shop to buy something, let's say a water bottle. The water bottle will have a price. So to buy one water bottle, you have to pay 100 rupees. Similarly, if you want to buy $1, you have to pay this much of rupees. So it's a direct quote. Indirect quote tells you to buy one LKR or to buy 1 unit of local currency, how much of US dollars needs to be given. How much of foreign currency that needs to be given. Okay, that is an indirect quotation. For example, to buy 1 rupee, how many bottles you have to give? It's a very indirect way of looking at it. Basically, it's a reciprocal way that you adjust. If you adjust your direct quote, you will get your indirect quote. But what's widely used in the markets is the direct quote. Now, do you remember these two words when we were going through participants? Base and counter currency? We are going to learn what it is. Now, base and counter currency, or counter is also sometimes called as the quote currency. You take the exchange rate, can you see that there are two different currencies? Yes, you can see euros and you can see dollars. One currency is the base currency, it's the currency that you want to buy. Other currency is the currency in which you are trying to quote, you are trying to give your counter. So, base currency, you see here, base currency is the price, is the 1 unit that you are trying to acquire. The counter currency is the currency in which you are quoting the price. For example, $1 is equal to 105 Japanese yen. What is the base currency? What currency are you trying to get? If I say one bottle is 100 rupees, what are you trying to get? The one bottle. So 1 USD. The base currency is the price for which the price is actually quoted. Okay, it's the 1 unit of that currency. Counter currency is the currency in which you are quoting the price. For example, if I say one bottle is 100 rupees, my base currency would be one bottle, my counter currency would be rupees. Why? I'm giving my quote in rupees. That's the currency. Understand, base and counter currency is there for you to classify the two currencies. Here, there are two currencies involved in the price. So, for you to know what is base and what is counter, this is helpful. If I say dollar is my counter, which means I'm going to give the consideration. I'm going to price the foreign currency in dollars. That's the amount that I'm going to pay, or the term in which I'm going to give my quote. So see this example, 1 euro equals $1.17. So here euro is the base currency, dollar is the counter or the code currency. Similar to the other example, $1 equals 105.55 Japanese yen. Dollar is the base currency, yen is the counter currency, the currency in which you give the price. This is another area that a lot of students get confused. The bid and ask quotes. Let me show something to you. Can you see here? Can you see that there is a buying price and there is a selling price? This is what we are going to look into now. Now we saw market forex dealers, authorized dealers in the market. What do? They buy foreign currency and they sell foreign currency as well. Okay. So they have the market power to decide the price in which they will buy and the price in which they will sell. We would call them market makers. Remember, market maker always gives you the buy and the sell quotations, the bid and the ask quote. Now that's why the bank tells you, look here, this is my buying price, this is my selling price. If you want, you come to me, if not, okay. Can we say the same thing? Look here, my buying rate is this, my selling rate is this. No. We become market takers. Market maker always provides you with the two quotations, the buy and the sell. It's the buy that we call the bid quote or the buying price. Ask quote is the selling price or the sell quote for the currency. Now look here, or let's go to our own example. $1 is equal to 198.5 rupees and $1 is equal to 202.99 rupees as well. What does it mean? Now here also it's the same thing. What does it mean? It means, let's take this example. It means $1 will be purchased by paying 198.5. Similarly, $1 will be sold at 202.99. Now, who is buying? Who is selling? If People's Bank is showing this, it means that People's Bank will buy the dollars. People's Bank will buy the dollars from the customer at 192.5. Now they are showing the selling rate as well, which means People's Bank will sell the dollars according to your requirement at 200, if you pay 202.99 rupees. So the bid and the ask prices, the buying and the selling prices are buying and selling prices of the market maker. What a lot of students get confused is they looked at this, which means now I can buy a dollar at 198.5. I can give my dollar to the bank at 202.9. That doesn't work. The bank will buy from you at 198.5, which means you have to sell it to the bank at 198.5. The bank will sell the dollar to you at 202.9, which means you can buy dollars from the bank at 202.9. It's the opposite position. Okay. So again, if you see here, whenever there is a buy and ask quotes provided, it of course means €1 is equal to $1.2102. That's the buying rate. Selling rate is €1 is equal to 1.2106 USD. Now who is buying it? The market maker will buy €1 from you by paying 1.2102 in dollars. Similarly, the market maker will sell the dollar that he purchased to you, to a person who doesn't have dollars or to a person who wants dollars. Will sell the euros to a person who needs euros if he pays or if the customer pays him 1.2106 in dollars. Okay, so the first number quoted by the market maker in here, the first number quoted is the buying price. So it is the market maker's bid quote. It is the rate at which, let me highlight. The yellow highlighted one, it is the rate at which the price maker or the market maker is willing to buy the base currency. What do you mean by base currency? The euro, €1 is willing to buy the base currency at that price, or he is willing to sell the dollars to you at that price. Now the second quoted number, what's highlighted in green, that is the selling price. It's the market maker's selling price. It's the ask quote. It is the rate at which the price maker is willing to sell the base currency or buy the quoted currency or the dollars. Now can you see the bid quote? The 1.2102 is the bid quote. That is lower than the ask quote. Can you see here? The buying rate is lesser than the selling rate. Why? The difference being the commission or the margin to the market maker. Market makers are always quoting prices in which they will buy or sell 1 unit of the base currency against the counter currency. So in the above example, market maker will buy euros for dollars 1.2102. Market maker will sell the euros at $1.2106. If you are the market taker, if you are a person who needs to buy from this market maker, what will happen? Now the market maker, now let's say, here I will write as Bank of Ceylon. Let's highlight this. Let's assume, just for an example, the Bank of Ceylon will buy euros for dollars 1.2102. If they are willing to buy euros for dollars, somebody has to give that dollars. Okay? That will be given by Bank of Ceylon. Why? They will pay the euros. They will buy the euros from you. which means you have to sell the euros. Can you see here? Market maker will buy the euros for 1.2102, which means the market taker will have to sell the euros for 1.2102. Market maker will sell euros at $1.2106, which means market taker will buy the euros for 1.2106. So this has to get adjusted. Change it in your slide as well. There's a typo. So a lot of students get confused here. Remember, buying and selling rates are given from the point of view of the dealer. It's not from the point of view of the buyer. Then we have another small thing which we'll see this, and of course we have a few more to go through. We don't have much time. We'll check it on our next class. Another concept which you need to know is hard currency and soft currency. What is hard currency? The term hard currency, it tells you, the term itself should tell you it's a currency which can bear shocks. It's not easily volatile. Soft currency, it could easily make an impact on it. So hard currencies are currency from well-developed countries, highly industrialized countries, which are widely accepted in the world as a payment method. For example, US dollars. You can pay in dollars to India, to China, to Afghanistan, Pakistan, anywhere. Why? It's a hard currency. It's acceptable. Why? Because the currency is relatively stable. You don't see a high volatility in its prices, and it's highly liquid in the foreign market, in the forex market. Soft currency. Soft currencies are currencies which are not liquid in the forex market. Why isn't it liquid? Because these currencies are not demanded in the market as much. These currencies are very volatile, easily impacted by the country's political and economical situation. So something goes wrong slightly, the currency fluctuates heavily. Now, if you trade based on such a currency, now think about this scenario. If you're trading, if you're making your, if you're selling your tea in Zimbabwean dollars, what happens? Every day, the external value of that currency is depreciating. So somebody will be losing. There is no volatility, there is no stability for that currency. So to avoid currencies which have these frequent volatility concern or is unstable for a period of time, a lot of international trade happens based on hard currencies. They avoid soft currency for international trade. Just understand, hard currencies are currencies which are from well-developed and industrialized countries, and these are widely accepted as a payment method for goods and services internationally due to its relative stability in value and because it's highly liquid in the market. Soft currency is the direct opposite. It gets influenced, it's prone to shocks, or it's vulnerable to shocks, it's vulnerable to shocks at any time. So most of international trade or market in general avoids to trade on these soft currencies. Okay. Next, what we have is the exchange rate determination. It's a very lengthy area. Let me run through it. Don't worry. In our next class, I will go through in detail. I just want to show you what the lineup is, what we would study next. Okay. So next we would study the exchange rate determination. When you are determining the exchange rate, what factors influences it? What are the regimes available to decide on exchange rate? Now, if the country has its own currency, of course, they could go for any of these 7 for exchange rate regimes. If that country doesn't have their own currency, then they could take another country's currency as their own currency. For example, let's say we don't have any currency for Sri Lanka, we can take dollars as our currency and use. So no any issue on foreign exchange. Why? Whatever the exchange rate used against dollars will apply for us. Or there are certain countries which is a member in a monetary union, so the common currency used in the union will be their own currency. Then again, they don't have individual exchange rates. Whatever exchange rate against the common currency will be their exchange rate as well. Then finally, we would have the forex forward contract. So when you are doing a forex forward contract, how do you decide on your forward rate? What is the basis of that forward rate calculation, and sorry, and what is the formula for that forward rate calculation? Don't worry, we have past paper questions as well with these. So I will explain it to you certain, when you do the calculation, certain points for you to note are highlighted here. And of course, you have purchasing power parity affecting the foreign currency as well. How it will affect, we will study next week. And then, of course, the past paper questions. I know a lot of students, given the choice, they avoid Forex, but it's one of the easiest area for you to tackle. So be ready so that your choice is not limited. Okay. So we will go through each individual question in detail. I have two very big important past paper questions, and the very last involves an arbitrage situation as well. So it's easier for you to make your decisions. Okay. So with that, we'll meet again next class. Thank you so much for listening in. I know our weekly questions have been halted for some time. I have certain various papers that I need to look into. I will look into and email them by next week. And then after that, by next Sunday, we'll carry on with the usual ritual. Okay. Thank you so much for listening in. Let's meet again next week.